Hello and welcome. I'm joined by NIX JEELVY, and we're going to talk about a number of topics. I first came across this guy a few years ago. I think it was on Millennial, and I've watched some of his videos over the last few years. I think he's an interesting guy. I think he's very good at communicating his ideas, and that's one of the reasons why I've invited him on for this podcast. So, Nix, you're very welcome. And how are things with you?
Things are good with me. Thank you, Betwixt, for inviting me to have this conversation, and I'm just happy to have a conversation.
Okay, so I'll ask you a number of questions, and the first one is, what would you consider to be your awakening or awakenings?
That is a very good question because a lot of people ask me, okay, how did you end up where you are? How were you awakened? And I never have a good answer because it was not a single event that did it, or it wasn't even a single series. It wasn't even an identifiable series of event. But I would say that it was a series of events spanning really, beginning in 2009 and ending in uh, 2017 or 18. So it was a long journey, but bit by bit, a little by little, you stop believing in the reality that the system wants you to believe. You start noticing things you're not supposed to notice, and you start systematizing all of these things that you notice, and you seek out other thinkers who likewise systematize them also at the same time. You lose a little time with detours, believing that some things can be um, fixed in other ways. So but I would say that if there was one thing that sort of shook me from my complacency, and please don't laugh when I say this, it was a video by Stefan Molyneux published in late 2016, not so much about race differences in intelligence, but about the political impact not only of intelligence, but also of personality traits. I already possessed a lot of this knowledge, but it was sort of a curiosity for me. And at that point, I started realizing, no, these facts will affect your life, will affect your civilization, the civilization you love so much, and you can no longer afford to be just you can no longer afford to remain inactive with regard to this problem. And and this Stefan Molyneux video is sadly no longer on YouTube. I don't think I can even find it on his website to review it once again. But it is what really was the final straw for me, you could say. And from beyond that, it was inevitable that I would start thinking in a certain way.
He was a gateway drug for a lot of people, and it is strange how he just seemed to disappear. I know he's still on alternative platforms, but I think he's gotten away from the political stuff. I think he does more shows about relationships and things like that. But a lot of people, I would say, had their awakening through him. And in fact, actually, when I started watching what would be called dissident videos, one of the first ones I saw was by him, and it was around the Cologne New Year's Eve thing. I think that was the first video I watched by Stefan Molyneux. Where would you consider your ideology to be now, Nix, in early 2025?
That's a very good question because I have no name for it, but I more or less understand what it is. I guess you could call me uncharitably a racist liberal, you know, because I obviously passed through the whole notion of, oh, we need authoritarian rule. in order to get nationalism going. And if we're going to be racialist thinkers, we're going to have to be authoritarian because yada, 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 reasons. But I'm an attorney. I used to be a lawyer for a long time. I used to be an attorney. I understand the law a little better than most people, I think. And all of these reasons I've ever seen why nationalist or racialist polity would necessarily be authoritarian always looked to me like they had no grounding in reality, whether legal reality, philosophical, moral, or political reality. And furthermore, I have become convinced over time that authoritarian polities are weak and they weaken the people they rule over. And I don't want our people to be weak. I want our people to be strong. I want our people to be beautiful. I want our people to be the best we can be. The only thing I would really, the only thing, not the only thing, but the thing that we need to change is we need to remove foreigners, outsiders from our lands. And this would allow for our flourishing, but I don't think this would require coming up with an authoritarian political system. So, for lack of a better term, I call myself a racist liberal. You know, that's of course a derisive term and for our ideology, but it is what it is. Until I come up with something better, that's what I'm going with.
Okay, and speaking of your legal expertise, we're going to get into this case of, the name doesn't roll off the tongue. It's not quintessentially Welsh. Rudakubana. Axel Rudakubana. That's it. And I have some statistics here about his murderous spree, and it was all done within 5 minutes. And it was an appalling story last year. It was one of the big stories coming out, and there were riots all across Britain, and the Prime Minister was turning his guns on the protesters, etc. And many of them were imprisoned. Some of them were imprisoned for shouting, horrible words at the police. But here are the statistics: 270 wounds in 5 minutes, and they say it's 54 wounds per minute. So this guy, Rudakubana, he arrived at 11:45 a.m. at this dance club for girls, young girls. At 11:47, the police were called to the scene. At 11:50, the police arrived and Rudakubana was arrested. Now, as far as I know, he killed 3 young girls. Elsie Stancombe had 85 stab wounds. I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it Beeb or Bebe King had 122 wounds, and Alice da Silva Aguiar had 4 wounds. And then there were a number of other survivors who also had wounds, one of whom had 32 wounds. It said that this guy, this monster, he used so much force that he even broke bones. And he was sentenced yesterday to 52 years in prison. Now, I saw on Twitter last night a number of people who were frothing at the mouth, wanting the death penalty for this guy. And I think that is an interesting topic. So, NIX, what do you know about the death penalty, perhaps its history, and why it has disappeared in many jurisdictions?
Well, I have to caveat this with some of you people who've maybe hearing me for the first time. I'm not British. I come from the Republic of Macedonia, so I practice within the Macedonian legal system and not the British one. And but I can give you some things that, for example, we learn in college about penology, which is the study of punishment, right? And of course, there are, if I remember correctly, 3 reasons why any society metes out any punishment. The first one is purely retributive. You did a wrong thing, now we will commit an evil against you, whether it's a fine, whether it's a day in the stocks, 5 years in prison, or we take your life. It is very plain and simple retribution. And it is a way of systematizing retribution so that we do not have, I don't know, angry victims or parents of victims claiming right of revenge, leading to a cycle revenge. It is a way of making revenge orderly. The second reason is we call the repressive reason. When someone commits a crime, when someone commits a wrongful act, it is very important for the community that this person be seen as punished. First, because to send a message to would-be criminals that if you do this thing, an evil thing will be done upon you. You will have to pay a fine. You will have to spend time in prison, or you will have to pay the ultimate price, which is execute, with your life. And the second aspect of it is the community needs to see justice being done in order to shore up the legitimacy of the state, because a state which cannot punish criminals is not a state worth being loyal to. It's not a legitimate state. And the third reason is the reformative function of punishment. So you broke the law, and obviously this is caused by reasons. The law needn't get into them, but ideally we reform you. You stop being a criminal and you rejoin society after you paid your debt to society as a normal contributing citizen, right? That is the ideal outcome. Now, in some cases, society deems certain criminals beyond reformation, right? And historically, more often than today, these criminals would be executed, and certain crimes, or committing a certain crime more than one time. So, for example, you may become reformed. Maybe there's hope for reforming you after you perform 2 thefts, but after your 3rd theft, it becomes clear that no, you're not going to be reformed ever again, and maybe we want to get rid of you. Or you commit an act which is so vile, which heaven itself cries out for your blood. So, for example, mass murderers, serial killers, historically even child molesters, they were executed. Or you commit an act against the state, such as, for example, treason, which basically no state would tolerate if it wanted to continue being a state. So treason is the classical, act. So execution, the death penalty, was usually reserved for these acts which were so heinous or so repeated that it would become clear that there is no reforming this criminal. There is no chance for forgiveness. There is no chance for repentance. This person has simply declared himself beyond the pale by his act, and this person with a very, very pronounceable Welsh name you mentioned, he killed 3 girls, right, or more?
3 girls, as far as I know.
Yeah, 3 girls, injured countless others. Our ancestors would have hanged him, and they wouldn't have batted an eyelash. This is a monstrous creature. This is a monstrous act that he did. And yeah, 52 years in prison. That's 52 years of his natural life that the state, which is to say the taxpayer, will pay for his upkeep. And so the question is really, who is being punished here, us or him? Well, I mean, I don't pay taxes in the United Kingdom, but you know what I mean.
I do. And I sent out a tweet yesterday evening about that the justice for the parents is that, through their taxes, they'll be paying for his food, his clothes, and his security. But it gets even more interesting because just before coming on, NIX, I looked at Twitter and, to get the vibe of what's going on now. And people are putting up tweets. One of them is from a guy called Peter Lloyd, and he said, Southport residents previously fundraised to buy Axel Rudakubana's brother Dion a new wheelchair. So there's a picture of the brother. So the community was very good to this family by the sounds of it, he says taxpayers will also likely be funding disability benefits in addition to the cost of rehousing the entire family with a new identity. So this is something that, I overlooked, that obviously the family will be under a lot of pressure now, and the state will have to, move them to a new place, a new town to start over, and taxpayers will be funding that as well. So it is, you do wonder, people look for justice. And I understand what you said there from the legal perspective, that, the state's main objective is to maintain the state. So, personal grievances can take a back seat. But yeah, it's another one here from someone called Screechy Marmot. They say it costs 51,000 British pounds per year to keep a prisoner in jail. It's going to cost the taxpayer a minimum of 2.65 million pounds for those 52 years. And they say that could be spent on public services. And then at the very end, they say you can buy 10 meters of rope for £20. So yeah, that seems to be the feelings of people across Britain, and I think across the West in general. The photo, if you do a Google search of this guy.
If I may interject.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
10 meters of rope would be too much and would decapitate him upon drop. Because I used to have the chart printed out, and among my papers, it's a British colonial chart from Hong Kong, where basically you determine the length of rope needed to hang a man based on his weight. If the drop is too short, his neck will not break. He'll have to suffocate over a period of 20 to 30 minutes. If the drop is too long, he will be decapitated, that the rope will rip his head off. And this happened to Saddam Hussein, for example, when they hanged him. So 10 meters is way too much rope to hang a man. I would, sorry.
Right. Yeah, there is a science to it. Yeah, so if you actually Google this guy, the photo that comes up of him is when he was about 12 years old. He's wearing glasses, and he looks like a very nice kid. And that's the photo that the media has been running for the last number of months. But in the last week or so, a mugshot of him surfaced, and some people talk a lot about physiognomy, and if you saw this guy, on a dark street, I think you would cross over. He does not look like a very nice person. So yeah, I'll move on anyway to another topic, and this was inspired by one of your walk and talks. So NIX, he does a number of videos. You set up the channel only a few weeks ago, I think, NIX. Is that correct?
No, it's actually been almost 2 months already. The first video went out December 8th. So yeah, more than a month. On February 8th, it's going to be 2 months old. But yeah.
Okay, right. Well, you do very. They're about 9 minutes, 10 minutes. Sometimes you're driving in your car. You can see the boxing gloves. I think it's with the Macedonia flag on it, moving about. And in other ones, you're walking around Macedonia with a fedora. You're chatting amicably about very serious topics. But anyway, you did a video. I think you might have done a few of them about Trump and Elon Musk and all the rest of it. So what is your impression of Trump's inauguration, the changes that are going to be brought about by Trump, Elon Musk? I get the feeling you don't have so much respect for him, but let us know. What do you think of these guys?
Well, I did a video specifically on the inauguration. Very eagle-eyed of you to notice that. And I said that the arrangement of the inauguration, the invited guests, the venue, all of it is symbolic of what Trump's policies are going to be going into this second term of his. So I don't know how many of your viewers are familiar with the neo-reactionary ideology, which is an ideology of hyper-capitalism, authoritarian rule, and they try to pretend to be race blind, but it very clearly favors a certain race which let's just say they form a majority in a certain Middle Eastern country, which is always at war with its neighbors. And this neo-reactionary ideology calls for the state to be ruled under what is called neo-cameralism, in which an authoritarian ruler confirms with the large business leaders in, people we would normally recognize as oligarchs, and the majority of the deals concerning the governance of the state are not done, for example, in the large chamber of deputies, such as, for example, the American Congress or British Parliament, but rather in the antechambers, right, in the small chambers, hence the name cameralism or neo-cameralism. Camera is Latin and Italian for chamber, small room. This was where we get the word camera for the appliance. And what we saw at the inauguration was in the first row, you had Elon Musk, you had Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, you had that absolute thing from Google, the CEO of Alphabet, I forget his name, another Welshman, I hear. And it became very clear to me that these are the people that Trump will confer with during his presidency. Well, I've been calling it the Musk presidency because Trump is obviously non corpus mentis. The man is old, he's diabetic, he's got some serious cognitive decline going on. And everyone else, American state governors, American senators, congressmen, they were put in a second chamber because the chamber where the inauguration was done was too small to hold everyone. And it was ostensibly done because the weather was cold, but that is bullshit. Sure, it was cold in Washington that day, but not so cold that you couldn't stand and see the American president being sworn in. People were pointing out that Kennedy was sworn in temperatures 10 degrees lower than Trump, and he still did it outside. This was done intentionally so as to symbolize this new form of government. And this new form of government will lead to America being essentially run like Yeltsin's Russia. You're going to have Yeltsin, who was facing cognitive decline, not due to age, but due to alcoholism. He was in the pocket of oligarchs, people who had bought up the wealth of the falling Soviet Union, privatized it, and essentially ran the country like a private series of private fiefdoms. And there were no protections for consumers, no protections for workers, no protection for ordinary folks, no protection for small businesses. Essentially, the government and big business colluded to destroy everyone's lives. And the thing was such a shit show that the West had to keep sending in capital, food, and financial aid to Russia all throughout the 90s. And that's what's going to happen to America right now, because how do I know this? Because Elon Musk, because J.D. Vance, a lot of these people coming into this new administration, they actually are neo-reactionaries. They follow a bunch of neo-reactionary accounts on Twitter. J.D. Vance was handpicked by Peter Thiel, who was Elon Musk's boss back during the PayPal days. And Peter Thiel he's the guy financing a lot of these based right-wing online people like Bronze Age Pervert, like Raw Egg Nationalist, a lot of these, like Curtis Yarvin, the father of neo-reaction. And so that's their ideology, and that's what you're going to see in the American government. That once great nation will be robbed blind. It will be, these people will nosedive the economy and then buy it up for pennies on the dollar, parcel it up between themselves, and run it like private fiefdoms. And this henceforth greatest Western country will be, none of us are American, but I think we're not so insecure that we cannot admit that, yeah, this is a great country, possibly the greatest Western country right now, at least, maybe to have ever existed. And they're going to destroy it. They're going to draw America into, if not war, then definitely conflict with all other Western countries. Donald Trump has already antagonized Canada and Denmark. He's beginning to antagonize the European Union, the rest of Europe. And yeah, that's really my take of it. I have nothing but bad predictions for the Musk administration.
Yeah, it's funny you actually called it the Musk administration. So yeah, actually speaking of Musk, I only saw like short clips of it, and Musk looks like he's drugged up to the eyeballs. He looks completely out of it. And just a question, the clips I've seen of Boris Yeltsin, was he ever sober?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. I don't think I can answer it. I'm not Russian. In the 90s, I was a wee lad in the 90s. I was born in the year 91. But if you look at clips of that fella, I mean, you do know that Boris Yeltsin was part Siberian native. I forget the specific ethnicity, but he is part of this Central Asian Tunguskan Siberian people who don't really have the alcohol tolerance of Europeans. Have you ever noticed that Asians, Native Americans, when they get into contact with alcohol, it sort of takes them over and destroys them? Maybe that's the reason why Yeltsin couldn't hold his liquor,
Right,
I don't know.
right. Is Putin, he has some Finnic blood or something, does he? Because he looks,
Yeah,
he looks a bit more like Finnish or Estonian or something.
it is entirely possible. And in fact, most of the Russians from the northern third of the European part of Russia have some, I wouldn't say have some, they are probably predominantly Finno-Ugric. I suspect that Putin is actually Karelian, right? And this is because Russia is not like right. The United Kingdom, for example, right now, it's not an ethno state, right? But it is historically built around four major ethnicities, those being the English, the Scotch, the Welsh, and the Irish. Those are the four major ethnic groups of the British Isles. And there is a sense of nationhood about the United Kingdom. There's a sense of nationhood about France and Germany or Norway or Macedonia, right? There is no such sense of nationhood for Russia, right? There is no central ethne around which the state coalesced. There is essentially a hodgepodge of Slavic and Finno-Ugric peoples which expanded eastwards and subjugated a bunch of Central Asian, Turkic, Mongolic, Tungusic, etc., 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 people who were then dealt into the body politic and became part of it. And yeah, so to say that someone is ethnically Russian is not really anything. It does not have biological meaning, even less than you could say, because for the let's say United Kingdom, what is the latest statistic? 80 something percent is still white British, right? So if let's say 82% of British passport holders are still what we would traditionally recognize as British. In Russia, there is no what we traditionally understand as Russian. So that's a bit of a problem when you ask, is he Russian or is he not? Because, well, what is a Russian really? And that's an honest question out east, whereas in the West, it's just a loaded question to undermine the nation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a continent as well. Like there are going to be massive differences as well. So I'll get on to in one of your videos, you spoke quite confidently about the end of Russia and how Eastern Europe should take advantage of this great opportunity and expand eastward. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So I've been predicting essentially the end of Russia as a coherent state, right? Since I would say late 2023, in late 2020, and basically it's earlier, it became apparent to me that the Russian state would not survive this conflict with Ukraine. That too much of Russian state capacity has already been expended And the thing about Russia as it exists, and Russia as it has existed for a very long time, is that the bulk of its state capacity, which we can understand as a measure of the state's ability to do things, as a very general measure, it represents financial power, political power, military power, internal policing power, legitimacy, elite cohesion. All of these factors, all of them together go into state capacity. And Russian state capacity has historically always been turned inward, as I said, because there is no central ethne, because there is no definable ethne. Russia has always had to expend a large portion of its state capacity on policing internal dissent, both from, peripheral subjugated peoples like, I don't know, Chechens, Yakuts, Udmurts, the whole Central Asian steppes, as well as the Slavic Finno-Ugric people who call themselves Russian, right? With all of the problems which that term implies. Um, all of these people, they were always dissatisfied with the state of affairs. They were ruled by an authoritarian clique in Moscow or St. Petersburg and then back to Moscow, right? And in many ways, it's like sitting on a throne of blades, to borrow a phrase from Yeltsin. And at all times, the resources of the Russian states were poured into maintaining the stability of this system. After 1991 and 2000, especially so. But at one point, one assumes that Putin had this idea. He has been in power for 22 years. You could say uninterrupted. He gets this idea that he can do anything, and so he invades Ukraine, expecting no resistance. No resistance. He runs into very stiff resistance, and he starts just pouring in state power, state capacity, resources into this conflict. And these resources are now coming at an end. We have, so for example, from YouTuber Covert Cabal, the guy who literally buys satellite imagery of Russian weapons depots and counts the machinery by hand. We now know that, for example, Russia is almost out of infantry fighting vehicles, as in there are no more infantry fighting vehicles in storage. And Russia had the largest infantry fighting vehicle fleet in the world before this war started, that legacy of the Soviet Union. And infantry fighting vehicles are an essential component of modern warfare, because infantry don't just go on foot into battle anymore, or shouldn't, at any rate. They should ride these vehicles, which can both transport them and support them with their firepower. Well, that is now gone. And you're seeing that on the front. You're seeing that the Russians are now charging Ukrainian positions on foot, or they're riding motorcycles, or Chinese golf carts, or electric scooters in one case. I sent one of these videos to my friend. It was like, this is such a GTA ass war. It's like people playing GTA. It's not except it is a war and people are getting killed. That's the infantry fighting vehicles. Russian artillery is in a similar position, not only because it's being destroyed. But
sorry, NIX, your voice has just dropped there. It got very low.
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, yeah.
All right, right. So where did it stop? Artillery?
Yeah, you were saying you sent an email to or a video to your friend, and you were talking about the Russians on scooters.
Yeah. So and I was saying, this is such a GTA war. It's almost comical what's going on, except it's not comical. It's a war. It's tragic. People are getting killed and maimed. Well, anyways, so that's the infantry fighting vehicles. The Russians are always also running out of artillery pieces. They're running out of tanks. The Ukrainians are bombarding their refinery capabilities. So Russia is, believe it or not, the world's largest oil producer. They're not going to run out of gasoline and aviation fuel, but they're feeling the constraints. And what's more, I just found out today, so I didn't know this when I filmed the video, that Russia has basically double the budget deficit it claims to have, because it laundered half of its budget deficit through the private sector. So what they do is the Russian central bank prints money, loans it up to private businesses, usually commercial banks, and then these private businesses give out preferential loans to Russian military industrial complex. And it's a way to pump new money from the from the printing press into the military industrial complex without it going through the state, so as to cook the books, so as to have to misrepresent your budget deficit. And to me, it's like, okay, so much money is just poured into the system, while it has fewer goods in it. And this is how you get hyperinflation. So the official inflation rate in Russia is 9%. That would be bad enough, but people have pointed out that prices of groceries, of gasoline, of necessities in Russia, they have not risen by 9%. They have risen by 30% relative to the start of the war and relative to the beginning of 2024 as well. So you have this situation where the Russian government just pumping money into the system. There's fewer goods to soak up the liquidity because not only of sanctions, but because the bulk of this money is going into the production of weapons and munitions, or as salaries for conscripts. And it's not really used to purchase any goods. You buy a tank, you take it to the front lines, it gets hit by Ukrainian artillery, and there's no value there left. But the money is still in the system; it's still circulating in the economy. So you have excess liquidity and not enough goods to soak it up. And that's how you get hyperinflation. That's how your currency becomes worthless and a joke. And now you have the Chinese and the Indians withdrawing from trade with Russia because they're afraid of secondary sanctions. And here's where it gets interesting. Russia has not declared general mobilization because it cannot. Its political system simply does not support general mobilization. Authoritarian systems, I mean, if the state is the private property of the Tsar and the boyars, or the emperor, or the president, or the neo-cameralist executive, then why should I, as a private citizen, serve in the army? What's my reason for doing it? Contrast to that, republican systems where the state is literally a res publica, which is Latin for public matter. They are, at least theoretically, commonly owned by own citizens, and therefore each citizen has a vested interest in defending the state, which then gives the state the right to seize me, to conscript me, put a gun in my hand, point me in the enemy's general direction and say, go kill those cocksuckers, right? And it would do so legitimately. It would have the political legitimacy to do so in the Schmittian sense. They say the concept of the political is reducible down to the friend-enemy distinction. A lot of people don't understand what it means. It means that the state, as the ultimate political actor, has the right to pluck you out of your private life, put you in public life as a soldier, put a gun in your hand and tell you, go kill that guy. He is the enemy. And those guys behind you, they are your friends, right? Well, authoritarian states have a much more diminished political capacity, because why should I go fight the king's war? It's the king's war, but you're doing it for the state. State doesn't belong to me. What's the state to me? It's a hindrance. I pay taxes, they get out of my way if I'm lucky. But if you're a citizen of a republic, you got some rights, but you also got some responsibilities. And so the Russians cannot do mobilization because that would break the Russian system. Every time they've done mobilization in the past, it has gone very badly for them. They had to sort of either reform the system from the ground up, or they already had an ideologically charged population. Such was the case in 41. And now the thing in Russia is the Russians are not ideologically charged, and Putin cannot insert ideological charge into the Russian thought space without losing power, because the deal that Putin offered Russians is, I take over politics. You no longer have to care about politics, but I give you stability. And now he has reneged on that deal. Russia is no longer a stable state. Russia is no longer even a functioning state, you could say. So, in this sense, and in the sense that there are, of course, things always going on among the Russian elite which we don't understand. There's that old Churchill saying, right? Bulldogs fighting under a rug. You never know what's going on, but you do know that something's going on. We've known as much since the Wagner mutiny. We now know that Russia is in a very precarious position. And like I said, the bulk of this state's capacity has always gone towards internal repression. Well, if the state capacity diminishes or is relocated for whatever reason, then all of these forces which were subject to oppression, they might actually start threatening the state, start eating it out from within, and thus weaken it even more, maybe even toppling it. Now, having thus predicted the collapse of the Russian state, we are now reminded that nature abhors a vacuum. And I have said, once Russia collapses, you're going to have something called the post-Russian space. And this post-Russian space will be immediately, I would say, immediately pounced upon by three actors. The first actor will be Japan, and we start with Japan because with them it's easier. We know what they want from the Russians in terms of territory because they have actually formulated it. They have put it in the I'm not sure if they amended the constitution, but they have actually made it part of their legal system that the island of Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands, which is a chain of islands connecting the island of Sakhalin to Kamchatka. So I'm going to ask you to visualize the map of the Pacific Rim, the northern Pacific Rim, for a while now. You have the four Japanese islands. You have the northernmost Japanese island, Hokkaido, right? And north of the Japanese island of Hokkaido is Sakhalin. Sakhalin is an island which was historically populated by the Ainu people, which are also native to Hokkaido. They're not Japanese. And historically, the southern half of the island was Empire of Japan. The northern half was Empire of Russia, later Soviet Union. And after the Second World War, the Soviet Union annexed the southern half of the Sakhalin Island. Now, north of Sakhalin Island and linking into a sort of creating a chain of islands separating the Okhotsk Sea from the Pacific Ocean, from the northern tip of Sakhalin to the southern tip of the Kamchatka Peninsula, and Kamchatka is the easternmost region of Russia. And you go further east than that, you get to Alaska, which is on the North American continent, right? This chain of islands, these are called the Kuril Islands. Japan claims both Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands because these are populated historically, of course, by the Ainu people, and the Ainu people are now considered Japanese, even though they're not Yamato. They're not Yamato Japanese like the rest of the Japanese. So, if Russia were to collapse, the Japanese would seize these islands immediately because that's just part of their legal system now. They consider these lands to be Japanese lands. Then you're going to have China. China already has territorial claims towards Russian territory. We are talking, of course, about a region called Outer Manchuria, which the Russians call the Russians' Far East, largest city and capital, Vladivostok. You've heard of Vladivostok. It's on the Sea of Japan, and it's Russia's primary Pacific port. I want to say only, but I don't want to disenfranchise Okhotsk. And it's also Russia's only warm water Pacific port because Okhotsk freezes over in the winter. And of course, this outer Manchuria was once in the in part of the territory of the Qing dynasty, which were ethnic Manchurians, but they ruled China. And of course, the Chinese consider this their ancestral land, and they have this claim. But furthermore, I believe that a vacuum of the post-Russian space will lead the Chinese to expand to most of Siberia. Now, the Chinese would prefer that Russia remain intact. They already more or less control the state economically. They more or less control Russia economically. But if Russia were to collapse, the Chinese would take the territories I just mentioned as a consolation price. And yeah, they would make them work. Siberia is very resource rich. Vladivostok is already 30% Chinese. There's already Chinese marrying with local women, many of them Russian, in Siberia, in the Russian East. And so yeah, that's the thing. The third player,
Sorry,
which would
Nix. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry,
No, I was just going to say, was it Vlada? How do you pronounce it?
Vladivostok.
Vladivostok. That's close to North Korea, is it not?
Yeah, it's very close to North Korea. It's
Yeah.
close to the Russian-North Korean border, where they have a rail bridge, the Friendship Bridge, I believe they call it, over, I forget the name of the river it empties into the Sea of Japan.
Right.
Over there.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. This is yeah, there is this a very fascinating region of the world to me, because on the northern side of Mount Paktu is Manchuria, on the southern it's Korea, and but the northern part is divided between Russia and China. The Manchuria no longer exists as a state, has been completely absorbed by these powers. Anyways, I was going to it, and the third power which is going to pounce on this post-Russian space is Turkey. Turkey has already been building its sort of new pan-Turkic empire. A lot of people here in the Balkans, they're apprehensive about, oh, what are the Turks going to do? They're going to be Ottomans again. They're going to conquer us again. I say, no. If you look at the behavior of Erdogan, he's not being neo-Ottomanist. He's being pan-Turkic, right? He's not looking to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, which would necessitate Turkey taking over parts of the Balkan Peninsula. No, he is trying to establish a pan-Turkic sphere of influence with the other Turkic peoples, those being Azerbaijanis, Turkmenistanis, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, and of course, and here it gets interesting, a lot of these Turkic peoples, these Turkic-speaking peoples, live in Russia, what we today call Russia. You have the Republic of Tatarstan in Russia, largest city and capital, Kazan, a noted university city within Russia. One of the famous conquests of Peter the Great. You have the Republic of Bashkortostan or Bashkiria in the homeland of the Bashkirs, another Turkish tribe. You have Perm. Oh, okay, no, Perm is not Turkic. My mistake. But in Bashkortostan, you had recently protests when a local environmental activist and national leader, because the two usually go together, because the land is the people and the people is the land, he was arrested by Russian authorities for opposing the construction of some environmental blight or another, and it had a very brutal crackdown in the capital of Bashkortostan, in Ufa. You have Mari El. You have various Muslim minorities, which may not be Turkic, but you know what? Turkey is Muslim too. So you have that too. And so in order to realize the dreams of pan-Turkism, Turkey would have to peel off a lot of these regions from Russia. A lot of these regions are also, by the way, very rich in natural resources. So, for example, Tatarstan in particular, it's very rich in oil. It's an oil-rich region, and it also sits astride the Volga River, which is a key internal waterway of the Russian Federation. So, very, very important to hold that. And in the event of of a collapse of the Russian state, you would have these three powers just pounce into the post-Russian space. And here I say, Eastern European, Central and Eastern European states, ideally the whole continent united, would at the very least secure European Russia. At the very least, to prevent bloodshed, civil war, warlordism, or excessive Russian and Chinese influence in the post-Russian space. At the very least, everything west of the Urals and the Volga River should be secured in one way or another by European powers. That's what I suggested. And of course, I say we need to do that because the Chinese could do it. If Russia collapsed today, the Chinese could do it, the Japanese could do it, the Turks could do it, but we couldn't because we're not arrayed to do it. We're not even thinking about doing it. We're not thinking about what do we do with post-Russia. We don't have plans for this. We're panicking about, oh no, all those nukes are going to get loose. Well, you know how they're not going to get loose? If we have a plan to go in and secure them, and secure the people, and secure the territory, and secure the resources. And that's why I just put it out there, because even if it's just one channel with 200 subscribers saying it, someone needs to say it, and hopefully it percolates up to the decision-making centers of Europe.
I'm sure for a lot of people listening now, this will be something new, this whole idea. You mentioned Sakhalin, that island. Is that a Jewish autonomous region, NIX? Because I remember reading a few years ago about that part of Russia, and I was reading about some part and it was considered a Jewish, they had some sort of autonomy.
No, the Jewish autonomous region is it is in the Russian Far East, but it's not on the island of Sakhalin. The capital of the Jewish autonomous oblast is the city of Birobidzhan, and this was sort of set up by Stalin to have a sort of Jewish reserve for the Soviet Union. But right now, I think only half the population of the Jewish autonomous oblast is Jewish. It was never really popular for Russian Jews. They prefer, Moscow and Tel Aviv. So what can I say?
Right. You talked earlier about conscription, and last year, new advertisements appeared in Britain trying to get people to join the military, and suddenly there were, white people in the ads, and people were saying, "Oh, they want to get the natives, they want them to go off and die." But it kind of, I would say it sums up what you said about the idea of having a stake in the nation. And I would say in the case of Western Europe, for the indigenous peoples, the young people in particular, they don't really have a stake in the country. Many of them don't have homes. They pay extortionate rates of rent to a landlord, or maybe they're 40 years old and they live with their parents. And so, who's going to be conscripted? And many people are saying this is why we have all these virile young Arabs and sub-Saharans coming into the countries, because they will be the future military. What do you think of this?
Well, this notion that Arabs or blacks will be the future military is laughable to me, because these are not martial races that you just mentioned. On this planet, the most martial peoples are all European, with the exception of the Japanese. So, but you do actually point out a very important reason why. So when have you heard of Günther Fellinger before?
I have not.
No. He's this Austrian fellow who is always going around that so-and-so should join NATO, and NATO will defend so-and-so country. And believe it or not, I had him on for an interview on my Odyssey show, hence discontinued. And I asked them this question: look, if NATO countries, so such as, for example, Britain, France, Germany, they have nothing to offer their youth, then who is going to fight NATO's wars? Who is going to, let's say, the Russians attack Poland, the Chinese attack Hungary or take over Hungary, whatever. Article 5 is invoked. All NATO countries are legally bound to defend to fight a war, fight a defensive war. Who's going to show up, right? Who is going to fight for the United Kingdom? Who is going to fight for Germany when these countries let their nations down? And he had no good answer for that. He had no good answer because there is no good answer. Like I said, it is when it's a republic, and it doesn't really matter if you have a king or a president. You know, when it's a public matter, when the government is the common property of citizens, right? Then the government actually has the right to say to the citizen, "Come, get out from your private life. Take this gun. Go kill that motherfucker over there," right? But our countries have lost this legitimacy because they no longer work for us. It is no longer possible to live as an Englishman in England or an Irishman in Ireland or I don't know, a Hungarian in Hungary for that matter. It's very difficult to be what we ought to be in our countries if it's become impossible. So they have no legitimacy, so young people are not joining the army. And if push came to shove, they would not be able to conscript us. They would not have the legitimacy, and that's concerning. And I would say that this nevertheless presents an opportunity for us if we are, white identitarians of any kind, that this is a bargaining chip we can use in if we ever get to negotiate with the government. All right, you need our boys to fight wars. We understand that. Here are the concessions we want to see. No more immigration, uh, uh, deportation of these racial aliens from our lands, an end to this policy, an end to that policy. Otherwise, our lads do not put on the uniform, they do not pick up weapons, they do not fight your wars. And there was for a long time in Western militaries this notion that we don't really need mass conscription or mass enrollment to fight wars because we're going to do just these brush fire wars like global war on terror, which are fought by an ever shrinking number of special forces elite specialists. But then the Ukraine war happened, and what happened was both Russia and Ukraine resorted to really mass infantry combat. It turns out that no, you cannot fight a war with just special forces, not a proper one at any rate. You can do these interventions against unmartial peoples with special forces, but in order to fight a proper war, a peer conflict, you need infantry, you need artillery, mass infantry, mass artillery, massed vehicular maneuver, and all of that requires either conscripting or mobilizing a large portion of the general population. You cannot build a war machine on the backs of special forces. You need infantrymen, you need logisticians, you need tank crews, you need artillerymen, and these people, they come from the general population. So, yeah, this is an opportunity, I would say, for nationalist leaders to, if they speak for a large enough portion of the white public, you need white men to fight your wars. We demand these concessions before our lads consider putting on a uniform.
Yeah, you often hear people talking about the idea of downing tools, that a lot of the tradesmen, etc., are, white people, and cities would just break down within 24 hours, 48 hours if white people didn't turn up for work in the morning, things like that. So, yeah, just to say something, I could just imagine, with that inauguration of Trump's and Elon Musk kind of as high as a kite, sending out these military ads. Are you fit? Are you willing? Do you want to fight for McDonald's or Tesla? Do you want to represent the rainbow flag? Do you want to go over the top? It's ludicrous, really. And people need more than that. They need more than that. So I'd like to get on to something that's a bit closer to home for you, NIX, and I guess it's closer to home for me now as well. In the case of Ireland, from about the year 2000, before that, we didn't have them. But they are an interesting group, not traditionally from Europe, but they've been here for centuries. The Gypsies, the Roma Gypsies, Are they patriotic? For example, in Macedonia, are they very proud to be from Macedonia? Do they benefit Macedonia? Do they benefit Eastern Europe, do you think? What's your impression of this group?
Well, to answer the question of patriotism, you do have these outbursts of patriotism from gypsies, but it's important to realize that gypsies are rarely truthful, and even in the event they are, you know, you sort of feel ashamed that this person is rooting for your team. You know, as for whether they contribute to Eastern Europe, no, they do not. The traditional economic activities of gypsies are stealing, prostitution, begging, and soaking up welfare. Those are the four. If the gypsies, the Roma, were collectively a nation, those four would represent. They would represent the whole of their economy: theft, beggary, prostitution, and soaking up welfare. And I have to say, prostitution is the most disturbing one, not because of what's going on, of how many gypsy women sell sexual favors, or how young they start selling sexual favors, or how many gypsy men and how young they start selling sexual favors, but that there are people out there willing to purchase the sexual favors of a gypsy is the most disturbing fact of that. Beyond that, what they have contributed. So, for example, I often have to drive on my daily commute through Gypsy Ghetto, and it is easily the most disgusting part of my day. The filth just piles in mountains. Skopje is, of course, one of the most polluted cities in Europe, among other things, because we have a large gypsy population, and the gypsy population heat their homes by burning garbage, tires, and whatever they can get their hands on, really. Just empty the contents of a bin into a furnace, and that's what they use to heat their homes. It's revolting. The air stinks in this city. I live in a very nice, very posh neighborhood of Skopje, but it doesn't smell posh, I'll tell you that, because the wind does not care what your income is or how much your house costs. There is literally no advantage that any Eastern European country has because it has gypsies. In terms of politics, they always block vote for whoever promises them the most gibs, right? The most welfare, the most assistance, the most graft. And yeah, I mean, on the economic level, on the political level. So, for example, you know, in Hungary, the reason why Viktor Orban has been able to cleave to power is because the gypsies, who represent anywhere between 10 and 30% of Hungary's population, are always block vote for his party, for Fidesz. And Hungary has, of course, had to suffer Viktor Orban for a very long time now. So these people contribute nothing in terms of economic value. They contribute nothing in terms of political value. They contribute nothing in terms of aesthetic value. In fact, they greatly subtract from the aesthetic enjoyment of life. You couldn't even say, like, you know, the usual liberal thing is that, oh, so and so people, they are criminals and they soak up welfare and they are blight upon the nation, but at least they brought us this exotic food. Well, the gypsies could not even boast that. There is no exotic gypsy food which I could name that has any value, that has brought in any value to Macedonia or any other Eastern European nation. And of course, if you're getting them in Ireland, I feel for Ireland. My heart bleeds for Ireland.
Yeah, you see videos now of Dublin city centre, and it looks like it's 80% gypsy beggars.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah. With they have the babies, and I remember when I lived in Dublin, and I didn't know much about the gypsies, But I remember there was an old woman who used to beg, and I used to walk to work, and I used to put a coin into her hand if I saw her, whatever. And one evening I was coming back from work, and I saw her and a few other women, and they were kind of huddled together at the side of the road. And suddenly this BMW, it looks like a new model, pulls up. And these two men get out and they start beating the crap out of the women. So I think they were the husbands or whatever, to get the money off them. And then they pushed them into the back seat of the car, like cattle, and drove off. And after that, I said, right, I'm never gonna give money again, because it's just going to those guys, to get drunk or whatever. So
you learned that in living in Eastern Europe, that when a gypsy, it doesn't matter if it's a man, woman, or child, begs on a certain corner, it's because they're renting that particular corner from the thugs who control it. And very often these beggars, they're not destitute, they're not in need of assistance. This is their primary occupation. They are able-bodied and they could do more, but they pretend. So there are ways to make yourself appear to be ill. There is, it's disgusting. So, and of course it's controlled by the mafia. You are enriching the mafia by giving money to beggars. If you want to help the poor, right, first of all, make sure they're not gypsies, right? Second of all, I've learned that if you want to help the poor, you're much better off giving them assistance in kind. So if there's a poor old lady, who, I have a friend actually who does this very often. He chops wood for all of the old women in his neighborhood who cannot chop wood for themselves, right? And these women, they appreciate that a lot more than money. And the poor, sometimes they need assistance other than money, and sometimes you can that's the best thing you can give them, right?
Well, that sounds very good. That sounds good. So I'll ask you final question. So about Macedonia, could you tell us a little bit about the culture, the history? I'm wondering, is there a big Turkish influence in Macedonia? Well, like I presume it was part of the Ottoman Empire. Tell us a bit about the language too, etc.
Yeah, there was a big there is still a big Turkish influence because of the Ottoman Empire. It's amazing. With every year that passes, we have more and more Turks in this city moving in. Now, of course, we've always had this Turkish minority of about 2% of the population, but now it's Turks coming in from Turkey, and they are different. They're different from our minority here. Macedonia is a country in the Balkans, right? In the southern part of the Balkan Peninsula. We speak a Slavic language, Macedonian, which is, we were talking before we started recording the show. It's strange because it has no cases. And I don't really appreciate it because it's the language I grew up speaking. But it's really strange among Slavic languages, and there's reasons for that. Culture-wise, we are Balkanoids. We have this sort of Balkan culture which has been around since this peninsula has existed. Of course, we speak a Slavic language, but if you look at genetic testing, we're not very Slavic. I think about 15 to 20% of our genome is Slavic. The rest is the same. It has always been, like, since the times of, you could even say, Alexander the Great. And this is also true of most of our neighbors. Bulgarians, they speak a Slavic language, but they are essentially Thracian. Serbs, they speak a Slavic language, but they are essentially, this Balkanate population. And we have the culture to match. Like, I joke around that no matter how Christian or how Muslim or how whatever, how atheist, how communist, how pagan a Macedonian will claim he is, we always go back to worshiping our god Dionysus, which is, it's strange to think of it that it's someone's everyday reality, but cultures have very, very deep roots. We are, of course, here talking about things which are more than 4,000 years old. These chains of tradition which are more than 4,000 years old, but you don't read it in a book. It is in the air surrounding you and in the habits of people. Um, and you sort of absorb them as you grow up. And only later, when when you start to sort of learn more about the world, you turn around and you look upon where you came from, and you realize, wow, well, that's my people. That's how strange we look to outsiders, right? But we are who we are. And in terms of culture, right? We have a. Is there anything in specific you would like to talk about? Because I'm out of ideas about what to
Yeah,
say.
no worries, no worries. Yeah, just maybe obviously you're going to be subjective here, but your general impression of the Macedonian personality, maybe, and
Ah,
the sense
I
of humor, etc. Yeah.
Okay, so Macedonian humor, it's very strange. When I had friends visiting me from the British Isles recently, they were surprised that even though we are continental Europeans here in Europe, we here in Macedonia, we get bants. You know, we understand bants, right? We understand sort of as the Italians would call it, breaking balls, insulting each other for fun. And yeah, I said, yeah, this is traditional for us. This is what we do. In groups of men, this is how men talk in Macedonia. We call it a rib. Yeah, it is a kind of culture. Then Macedonian humor. It is very contextual because we are a high context culture. Uh, Macedonian jokes don't really work if you write them down because you need to have sort of do the proper voice, you need to have the proper timing, you need the body language. And we're a Southern European people. We talk with our hands, we talk with our entire bodies even. I had a I was speaking to an American woman who had lived in Italy for years. She came to Macedonia for holiday, and she said, it's strange to me. It's like I never left Italy when I come to Macedonia because you guys, you talk with your hands. You wave your hands around when you talk. I'm like, well, how do you talk? This is so natural to me. You don't really notice it until a foreigner comes and points it out. Yeah. And as for the Macedonian character, I was really just discussing this the other day with some friends. How about how someone like, for example, Alexander the Great embodied everything that was good, but also everything that was bad about the Macedonian character. So Macedonians, we are very hospitable, we are very friendly, we are very gregarious as a people. We like being around people, we like being with people. But on the other hand, there is this sort of excess to that we are very strongly xenophilic. We love foreigners. We love interacting with foreigners. And as a result, we are very trusting and we are very tolerant of, very accepting, you could say, of ethnic minorities, too accepting for our own good, right? And then there is, of course, the exuberance. We are a partying people. We are people that love to have fun, very heavy drinkers, by the way. The boozing is a big part of the culture here. Boozing to excess is a point of pride for a lot of Macedonians. We don't do binge drinking though. We look on binge drinking as a sort of weakness of character, but the ideal would be to never really sober up, but never really get so drunk that you fall over. Just be merry drunk all the time. Of course, that's just the ideal. Nobody really attains it. I have tried for years to attain it, and I've come close several times, but no.
Do,
My
do you
ideal day.
normally do you
I'm sorry.
normally eat when you drink, or do you, like in Ireland and England, we tend to just drink and then at the end we might eat something. But I know in Spain, for example, they have tapas while they drink.
Yeah, the idea is, of course, to eat while you're drinking because we have something called rakia here, which is a wine brand. No, it's a grape brandy, and it's very strong. And when British people come and have rakia, they treat it like a shot. And I say, don't do it, don't do it like that. You're gonna die if you do that. And they get very drunk because they cannot handle. It's 48, 50% proof. Sometimes it's very strong liquor. You have to get something in your belly to soak it up when you're drinking it. So we usually eat salads or barbecue along with it, and it really is there really just to soak up the booze. Um, but the idea is, of course, to be always lightly buzzed to merry drunk and never get out of that ideal zone. Of course, that's just the ideal. Now, I remember once when I was, I guess, 20 years old, I had a day where I started drinking at noon, and all the while I was either just buzzed or merry drunk, and I until I collapsed from exhaustion in the middle of the night, right? Just and that was my ideal drinking day. I've never been able to replicate it since, always veering into one extreme or the other. But like I said, with this will to alcohol, there is all of the attendant social dysfunctions of drinking to excess, and all of the attendant social dysfunctions of just wanting to be merry all the time. You put off your problems, don't really think about them because they're bringing you down, and you only really think about them in the morning when you're hungover and your serotonin's depleted, and they look so overwhelming that they crush you. So that's the Macedonian national character. And the reason why I'm so merry now, it's because not because I've been drinking, but because it's not the morning. Yeah. So that's the Macedonian national character. It's interesting. It's in some ways deeply dysfunctional and not meant for the modern age, but in other ways, it is who we are, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Nix, thank you very much for coming on and for this conversation. People listening in, I recommend you check out Nix's YouTube channel, his Telegram, and he also has a website. He writes articles, I do believe. You can tell us a little bit about that before you go, Nix, but all those links will be in the description of this video.
Yeah, of course. I have the YouTube channel, which, as you mentioned, walk and talks, usually 9 to 10 minutes long. And sometimes I'm driving, although lately what's been happening is my phone is banging up against the plastic in the car, so it makes this very offensive noise. So I've been trying not to record while driving. And I'm also editor-in-chief on radicaldose.com. That's a magazine. I of course write there as well, but we have a whole host of very talented, very high quality writers over there. Aside from myself, we do a mixture of political and non-political content, because, well, you can't just discuss politics all the time. So make sure to check that out. And if you want really the day-to-day updates of everything I do, you should follow me on Telegram, because that's the social medium I'm primarily using for the time being.
Okay, Nix, I leave you with the final words. I'm hoping that you'll give us an old saying, translate it into English, and then you'll give us the original Macedonian.
All right, so I've become a little notorious for saying this one, but we have this saying in Macedonian, which is "vo ista tikva prdat," which means they fart into the same pumpkin, and it means that two persons who pretend to have disparate agendas or loyalty actually have the same agenda, or they have the same loyalty, and thereby they both fart into the same pumpkin. And a friend of mine actually traced this back, the linguistic roots of this saying, back to the Roman era, where people used to shit together in Roman communal toilets, and uh, it appears that the original saying was they shit into the same amphora, right? But because because the word for amphora is the same as the word for gourd in both Latin and Greek, it somehow turned into gourd and later pumpkin, and then translated into the Slavic language, Macedonian, right? It became they fart into the same pumpkin. I suppose at some point someone realized like two men cannot shit into the same pumpkin, so they assumed, yeah, maybe they should be farting into it. But keep that in mind when some people tell you that so and so is going to defeat the elites, or so and so, well, they're different from the other politicians. Ultimately, they all fart into the same pumpkin. They all serve the same masters and have the same agenda.